Well. Here we go. Hi, Sheri and Allan.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much. I am so grateful for both of you to come on to my podcast today, which is a very important podcast, I think. We know that Truth and Reconciliation is coming up here on September 30th. And I really wanted to honor the children and the legacy and the future of this day. But before we start talking about Orange T-shirt Day, I want to get both your stories. So, Allan, maybe you go first. Tell a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, it turns out that my mom had married out of mission school early to get off the res and start a life, and she had had my older brother. That her husband died, an older man she married died, and then she was kicked off the farm, and then she come back, and she was an early 20-year-old woman and with a baby, and been kicked off a farm from Falliere, I think, or the area.
Wow.
But yeah, the family kicked her out. She. So, anyways, the story goes that she just decided she had to get out of here. So she asked Kokomo Muslim to mind her kids because she had
Hmm.
fallen in love with another fella. I've got a wedding picture of her in 1962 marrying
Wow.
this and beautiful May Day. And my Kokomo was there. My Chapin was there. My great grandmother, my grandfather, and my grandfather's brothers, and this fella that married my mom. He was Murrin Card, and they split up. So thankfully, because we wouldn't have existed otherwise. So then
Right.
um, I'm thankful. so my so they split up, and she decided to move to BC. Met my dad in a lumber camp. He was a sawyer. There was a lot of racism going on in that period, and really
Mm,
blatant racism. I mean,
yeah.
squaw was a word that was continually thrown around. Every time they got drinking and fighting, she was a
Hmm.
squaw. Take your half-breed Indian kids the hell out of here, or the f out of here.
Wow.
So just types of things like that. But
Hmm.
that was the nature of what he grew up in, and made him
Yeah.
work with the community. He was very blue-eyed, Finishman. Um,
Wow.
and he had lost all his teeth along the way from
Hmm.
dental, because they were actually orphaned. His dad died from a tree falling accident on Vancouver Island. My
Oh.
grandpa, but died 5 years later from internal injuries and complications,
Mm.
and just fell down in front of him dead. And my dad was 5, so they were actually. But he does recall a story that there was no social services at the time. That would have been in
Mm.
1939, 44,
Right.
45, and the people of the local native communities in the area we used to leave venison and food for this widowed family,
Oh.
and that was how they part how they survived initially,
Hmm.
right through the. It's not terribly cold there, but it does get pretty ugly in the winter. And they would wake up to stuff left on their doorstep. He'd told my mom. And so, anyways, they fell in love in the lumber camp. She moved him into her shack. She was second cook. She was a native gal. And they just had this odd drinking, loving relationship that they decided to have children and live. And they
Hmm.
got married. I think my sister was out of wedlock, and then they got married. And my brother, and there was a boy between my sister and I. He miscarried, and then my younger brother, and then the story continued. But a lot of drinking, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of
Hmm.
work, a lot of workaholism, alcoholism, because
Yeah.
dad just went to work early to support his siblings and his mom.
So
So
you
he
talk
was at work.
about, sorry, you talk about being BC in the community there. Is that where
Yeah.
you're originally from, or
Actually, well, my mom was from Sucker Creek, and I was
okay?
born in Wind Lake, and then we moved all over. So I had 23 schooling institutions when I went to college in 1994.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
I've been to 23 schools. Um, just moved all over the province, all over Alberta, all over
Okay.
Canada. We didn't have I was born in Wims Lake, but we didn't really reside there.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a
Okay.
hometown.
Gotcha. So
We
what would you consider your community then? Which
ah, I've been married for 36 years now, so wherever my wife lets me put my pillow and stay with her, that's where my home is.
ah.
So I don't care. I don't really actually care. But Sucker Creek is my home community,
Okay.
um, and I'm part of. We've been here for a dozen years, so a third of our marriage now has been in Sucker Creek.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, we're gonna live here. We have land here now. We live
Oh,
here.
nice.
Yeah. So
Nice. Okay.
that's kind of cool.
All right. Okay. Well, then let's turn it to Sheri. Tell a bit me about yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
So I come from a pretty large family, and we have a bit of an odd history.
Hmm.
My mom was from Nova Scotia. My dad was born and raised in southern Alberta, but my
Hmm.
mom couldn't have kids, and so my mom was working as a professor at Brandon University. My dad was attending the university,
Ah,
and they couldn't have kids, so they decided to adopt. So, in that process of adoption, they found out they were pregnant with me and decided to follow through with the adoption in case the pregnancy didn't stick. And
yeah.
then 7 years later, they had my little brother. But my five oldest siblings are originally from a family of 10.
Oh.
They were adopted through the 60s scoop.
Oh.
So, yeah, so I have this really conflicting position about the 60s scoop.
Yeah.
Without it, I would have no family. And
Right.
at the
Right.
same time, what a horrific way
Hmm.
to do things, like, nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
they are connected with their family, and they have a good relationship. I have a
Oh.
very good relationship with my brothers and sisters. We grew up in a small town in the Northwest Territories,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
that time was a magical time for us to be growing up there.
I
That is my
agree.
community. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. You know what I'm talking about.
Pine Point
Um
right here. Yeah.
yeah, when I talk about home, that's what I
Mm.
talk about. I still am
Oh.
very connected. I have a handful of friends. I live in Calgary now,
Hmm.
and I've lived all over the place. I've lived in the U.S. and I've
Yeah.
lived all over Alberta.
Yeah.
But when I talk about home, it's Fort Smith. It's the Northwest Territories, and so I grew up in a predominantly Indigenous community. I was a minority,
Hmm.
um, so I have like for me. Um, this was like associating with and hanging out with and indigenous people being holding positions of leadership and power and those
Yeah.
things that was normalized for me growing up.
Hmm.
Coming south and observing the racism that existed in the
Yep.
city was such
Yep.
a strange thing for me. Like
Yep.
it was very unsettling and confusing. Like I was
Hmm.
16 when we moved south, and so I was very confused about what the big
Yeah.
deal is.
Hmm.
My parents were very progressive. My mom was a very forward thinker. She was
Hmm.
the first person to organize the Native women in our town to create a shelter for battered women in our town. Like she initiated that. And
Yeah.
she also initiated a program for the women's prison in our town where women could gain employment. And
Oh,
she started that program, and
yeah.
this goes back to when she was working at Brandon University. She started a program for First Nations people to
Mhm.
be able to come to Brandon University and complete their high school while they were working towards a teaching degree.
Okay.
So she built a hybrid program, the PEP program, which is still in place today. Brandon
Yeah.
University still follows that model today. So I grew
Mhm.
up with very progressive parents. My dad was,
Mhm.
although he, I think in our home things were a little different, but out in the
Mhm.
community, he championed women and First Nations
Oh.
people. His master's was so he was a teacher. He taught
Mhm.
education at the college, and his master's was focused on Indigenous education, like how do Indigenous children learn, and how do
Yeah.
we adapt our teaching styles to include that. And so he taught all over the Northwest Territories. So that's the history that I come from. Is that sort of
Right.
very? It's not that I don't see color. Yeah, I see people
Mhm.
of color, and I see the
Mhm.
different ways that people show up. It just doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. It doesn't
Yeah.
influence the value or the worth that people bring to the table when they come to the table. And
Absolutely.
so,
You are right. Yeah. And
yeah,
you know what? I agree with you. My life in the Northwest Territories was magical, like you mentioned. And then we moved down to Alberta, and a lot of the racism there.
yeah,
Definitely
yeah.
I
It's
experienced it.
often,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, for
yeah.
sure. Okay. So, thank you for sharing your stories. I want to delve deep now, Alan, especially since we're talking about National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I would like you to expand on your family's history in the residential school, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Anyway, so mom was born in 42. And so she was 6 years old, having no indication anything was going to come her way. She remembers
Right.
some things. Somewhere in the wartime efforts, they were moving U.S. troops through here for the Alaskan Highway, some such, or troops
Uh-huh.
around. And she remembers seeing a black man in the train, or numerous black people coming across on
Wow.
the train, and they would go out to see the train, right? Um, and they would wait, and she couldn't understand what was going on. Like, just
Mhm.
real innocent childhood of my mother remembers cooking, singing the little birds that make these noise,
Mhm.
cheer up, children, like
Mhm.
always real sweet. My grandmother was fairly innocent. She was survived the 1918 Spanish flu. Her parents died. She was
Wow.
orphaned. They tried to make her a nun, and she could think
Oh.
she didn't. She met my grandfather, and he couldn't.
Yeah.
They couldn't keep him in mission school when it started because it was so
Yeah.
new.
Mhm.
So he could just run away in the bush. But he had to take his children starting because my mom was like a middle to late child, and they
Okay.
had to take all his children on pain of, I think it was a couple years in imprisonment per child.
Mhm.
So he had to, rather than have, so he opted to bring his kids to the mission school, which is about 15 minutes away, probably half a day by wagon and stuff.
Okay.
And my grandfather was a well-to-do as far as he was able to trap and he was a carpenter. My grandmother had a huge garden. They fed people. Um, they just took care of each other and others. Her garden was
Mhm.
huge, apparently. That's what I keep hearing about. And she made
Mhm.
hide and moccasins, and she beaded and she
Wow.
sewed. So they had a life where they could manage their dozen kids, right? But they weren't allowed to. So that was a great sadness came along in the communities. I think a lot of alcoholism stemmed from there because they also made
Yeah.
homebrew. So I must have played the fiddle. They had lots of parties,
Yeah.
entertainment. She had this idyllic life, but she went to mission school at 6, and they cut her
Mhm.
hair off
Oh.
into a bob, and they threw her hair ribbons into the floor and a big mound of hair. She remembers, and that was the first time she's ever been hit. Was and the
Oh.
words savage. And it was the dousing with the powder and the showering and the stripping away of her identity, or she was just. And what they called having charges was older girls who'd been there longer to mind the younger ones, to be
Mhm.
clear to them, give them opportunity to how do I put it, to mind the younger kids. Quit crying, don't cry. Kai
Yeah.
Mapo means don't cry, stop crying, don't cry.
Yeah.
And she remembers this being something they would tell her: don't cry, don't speak your language on fear of corporal punishment, right?
Mhm.
So, and there was all manner of shenanigans going there. We'll talk further later, I guess, about the IRS truth and reconciliation, or the
Mhm.
ground truthing we're doing at the mission school.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, so there is anomalies we found. There's quite a number of them, of
Yeah.
actual children buried where they said they were buried. The priest workshop, the barn, outside of the the cemetery.
Mhm.
So just they said it, and they were found, and we could see the graves. We could see the likely graves, the possibles, the probables, like just based on the shape and size of graves, right?
Yeah. Oh.
So it's pretty disturbing. So we got 88 anomalies we're dealing with, and that's the first 1.3 acres out of 20 some acres. So like, these are we picked the highlighted areas. The elders have gone through that. So my
Mhm.
mother entered that mission school into the residential school, lived there for 9 years, and she lived or died with bronchial pneumonia for 6 weeks and no care. So she was left
Oh.
alone in the
Oh.
infirmary, and so she could live or die. And she chose to live and survive, or good thing she did. So I feel like
Yeah.
everything, and my wife and I's 15 grandkids, and us and our marriage and my life has all
Mhm.
been based upon her ability to survive. And so she didn't
That's
experience
amazing.
her sex offense from school and the priests and the nuns. It was here in the
Right.
community, but from historic sex offended against children coming back to the community, getting older, and then
Mhm.
molested. So this cycle, we have a
Yeah.
rampant history of sexual offense and
Right.
documented priests,
Mhm.
nuns, sexual offense against boys and girls.
Yes.
So this was introduced to us,
Yeah.
right? Introduced to our communities. Mom, just she had to keep me safe. She had to keep our children safe, her boys, her daughters, from that. It wasn't so successful. We were okay. We were moved. We grew up in BC elsewhere, but it was rampant in the
Mhm.
community, in the area, and based and predicated on priests and nuns, assaulting and abusing and using children and teaching
Mhm.
them this. So yeah, so I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
My mom kept us safe from that. My dad kept us safe from that. But
Uh-huh.
she does remember seeing her offender when he was on his
Yeah.
deathbed, and he knows, Margaret. I know, he said. I know, but he's an old man dying then by that time. So
Wow.
she had some closure of some sort. She lived her life, and she carried on the best she could. She got some education the best she could. She was
Uh-huh.
you know the education was mediocre,
Uh-huh.
subpar. Her math was always really super weak, and she could
Uh-huh.
write to a degree. But I think a lot of our history is in utero trauma, right?
Right.
Where we talked about this last night, Sheri, where I don't want to like say I'm FAS or I'm I'm fetal
Right.
alcohol syndrome, or I
Uh-huh.
don't feel that. I just know that there is fight or flight mechanisms that I'm like I have to really monitor myself, right?
Yeah.
Um, because you grew up in utero and violence and
Uh-huh.
drinking, and not so much the
Yeah.
drinking because mom wouldn't drink when she was pregnant, but
Uh-huh.
the violence, the fears, the anxiety, there's those pheromones and hormones,
Uh-huh.
flowing through, cross placenta to me and to my other, siblings.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all affected and we're globally affected.
Uh-huh.
So residential school was absolutely an atrocious thing.
Yes.
Right? And
Yeah.
there's no way to make it shine a light on it. That an interesting point of view, a friend of mine said clearly to me that she was so astounded to think that she even had her own bias, Caucasian lady, but
Oh.
still her husband was a survivor, is a survivor. And she said that women are more violent. She understands now that women are not predominantly, or there's not, women are not more kind inherently than men.
Uh-huh.
They're vicious or worse.
Yeah.
And the nuns
Oh.
were terrible. And actually, matter
Yeah.
of fact, the only time I did get hit was in a Catholic school in grade 3, and I got slapped by a nun, like slapped. It was
Wow.
like the behavior, the authority, the autonomy, the power
Uh-huh.
over a group of people,
Yeah.
supported by the government, and
Uh-huh.
allowed to, complete reign over another group of people based on race.
Uh-huh.
Um, and of course, the gender flip flop from a paternalistic mindset, European mindset, to what
Uh-huh.
we like. I'm a mama's boy, and I'm fine by that. Like, doesn't
Yeah.
make me any less of a man. It just makes me more respectful to women, and I think
Yeah.
it's served me well in my marriage to be like I'm okay that my wife, shoots a handgun and swings an axe and whatever she
Uh-huh.
wants to do does, and as a
Yeah.
nurse, support the family when she says, no, you quit your job because you can't stand it, you're not doing well there. And
Yeah.
so I quit and I moved to another job or do something else or change careers. I've been really blessed, and I wouldn't be like that had I, been raised by my father exclusively to be him.
Wow.
Right?
Uh-huh.
So my mom had a huge influence in a maternalistic, I think, in a matriarchal maternal way. She had an influence on me that she wouldn't allow for that. She wouldn't
Right.
allow for us to be misogynistic. I very much believe that women and men have different roles in a marriage and a relationship and a family. And
Uh-huh.
and people disagree if they want, but my wife and I, she doesn't do breaks, and I don't do uh, cooking, you know, laundry. I can
Right.
help put it away, but now we get our laundry done at the laundromat.
Uh-huh.
It's just
Right
us.
on.
But
Yeah.
that's it.
Well,
So residential school was awful.
yeah. You know what I've seen by your story that you've told is that they had resilience, right? They wanted
Mm.
to in many ways they wanted to survive so that they can maybe carry on that legacy and show the future, the children that experience was bad, but it shows the people, actually, the indigenous people, how strong they really are and how important it is to keep that culture alive, right? Like there's so
That was
many
the end
motive.
result. I think while they were surviving, they were just trying to get through because there was a
Yeah.
disparity in food quality. You'd serve the priests and
Mm,
nuns in another room, and their food
yeah.
was what they grew. All the food
Hmm.
product it's basically a slave farm.
Yeah.
And I've heard this lots where they had cows and milk and cheese and bread and all
Hmm.
manner of foodstuffs and gardening stuff and huge gardens, and they
Yeah.
would make profit off that. But the children would eat literally like you
Yeah.
see, like weevily gruel, and my mom
Mm.
could never eat Sunny Boy. Porridge wasn't something she could manage.
Yeah.
And that's what they grew up on. They got the
Mhm.
garlic whilst they served the priests and nuns the good food in another dining hall. So they just survived.
Yeah.
They just got through. They weren't doing anything in their intention heroic or good. They were just trying to
Mhm.
help each other. So to bring it back home, and I think I know what you're saying, but
Mhm.
for me to explain it is we were doing
Yeah.
rollout, trying to identify more pictures from our ground truthing, getting ready for our first initial, demonstration as a people, like having a group
Mhm.
gathering.
Yeah.
So we're trying to identify more pictures, and these two ladies came, and they were way up north. We're at a Treaty 8 gathering, and they were looking at me once I introduced myself, and I introduced that my mom was Margaret, and she was,
Mhm.
such and such. And they took about half an hour. They came back around, and they said to me, and I'm like, "Are you okay?" And they were kind of got emotional, and they said, "We have to. We decided we have to tell you that we knew your mother in mission school, and that we loved your mother, and your mother saved us. She was our big girl. She was our charge." And these are old ladies now. They're in their 70s, and they're just
Yeah.
cute as buttons. But they wanted to tell me that they loved my mother, and she
Oh.
saved them, and she protected them, and she kept them safe. So the children found means and ways of surviving.
Mhm.
Mom used to be fairly well off with her candies and hair ribbons and stuff she could
Mhm.
share. She was small. She used
Yeah.
that from my Auntie Gertie, who's from Deerpile or a ways away. And
Mhm.
Auntie Gertie was basically my mom's muscle, took care of my
Yeah.
mom and kept her safe physically. She was my mom's protector till my mom
Mhm.
was big enough to be in charge, to be a charge girl
Yeah.
and a protector of these two girls that told me
Mhm.
this last summer that they loved my mother. Right. So
That's
it's just
amazing.
so they survived. The children survived by
Mhm.
Creator's grace.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I want to hear if you have experiences to share. I absolutely, please do.
Well, this is interesting because I meet a lot of people who are non-indigenous who
Mhm.
will say to me, I don't really have any experience. I don't really have any frame of reference or whatever. If you take into consideration the 6 degrees of separation,
Hmm.
we all we all have some kind of connection or
Mhm.
experience with
Yeah.
residential schools. So Fort Smith, the town that I grew up in, had a residential school. And I think that our experience was unique. And I'm not gonna like I didn't participate. I wasn't in I lived with my parents and I went to school. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's different everywhere in the country. Like I think
Right.
even across the territories, the
Mhm.
residents across the territories were different experiences.
Mhm.
So I certainly went to school with kids that were in residential school technically,
Yeah.
um, but it was a very different experience. However, my son's father, so my number 2 child, my son's father, went to day school, and
Oh.
his older siblings went to residential school.
Hmm.
Oh.
And so that experience certainly influenced the way he moved through life and the
Right.
way he interacted with his parents, his siblings, his
Mhm.
friends, his intimate partners, his so on
Mhm.
and so forth. It definitely influenced his fight or flight system.
Yeah.
Definitely shifted things for him in terms of some of the choices that he made that then resulted in him being unable to participate as a co-parent for his children.
Right.
And so my son missed out on some of those experiences that you would hope to enjoy when your
Mhm.
mother is white and your father is Cree.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And that was difficult for him. Certainly,
Yeah.
my husband and I are very, very comfortable on his reserve. We've been to his reserve. We
Mhm.
supported when my son's grandfather passed away and he wanted to go, but he didn't feel comfortable going by himself. We packed the whole family and we went.
Mm.
But we had to take on a very unconventional role there
Mm.
because his dad had made some choices as a result of his experiences that were
Right.
directly related to residential schools. And so
Mm.
you see the
Hmm.
cascade effect that
Yeah.
has, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And now as an adult, they're building a relationship. because my practice is to lift up, build up, and because my experience with First Nations,
Mm-hmm.
there's no value in me taking any position on something I have no experience with, and
Right.
so we just we just were the example of empathy and understanding and neutrality. It's none of our business.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
whatever happened with him is none of our
Mm-hmm.
business.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to love and support, and that's it. That's where that is.
Yeah.
That's what my role is, and so that's what we do. But it's interesting to hear other. I mean, I grew up in a different era. So the era that I grew up in, First Nations people were Aboriginal or Indian, and white people.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting for me to hear other white people say, yeah, I don't know anything about residential schools. I don't know anybody, I don't have anybody that, and I'm like, I doubt it. Let's see
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
that goes, because
Yeah.
I bet that somebody who has been impacted by the residential schools. And now that is true, when you think about Meshach's dad's experience and my experience with his dad, and then now Meshach and his experience with his friends and his girlfriend and her, and on and on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
It just goes like this. It's like a spider web.
And it's all connected. Yeah.
And it's all connected. And it's all connected. So although I had, like, personally, my experience with residential schools was very, like, I mean, there's no, it's not even worth talking about, because it was such a different thing up in the territories.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for my son and his dad, it certainly changed their lives.
Wow, that's incredible. Holy jeez, what a story.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's nice to learn about all these different, types of experiences, for sure.
So anyway, where are we at now? Okay, so where are we at? It all had to come out of we all had to come out of alcoholism. I dabbled in when I first got married. For some reason, so I've been since, and I think I talked to Sheri about this, in the violence and the alcoholism and the just atrocity of Margaret's unmanaged, mission school effect, sex abuse and trauma, all that stuff. So, dealing with that with my mom, she was either Margaret or she was mom. And when she was off and getting wild, we would have to, Margaret, stop. Like, you need to stop this, from a very young age. So it would be like, hey, Margaret, you need to stop. Like, we need to stop. Then it would be mom again when she kind of snapped out of it. So then we just kind of had this relationship where I was a confidant at a very early age, which is his own sort of form of abuse, right? Well, I was always the one that he told stories to, or we, leaving in the middle of the night from, bloody fight and everything else, and working up again. So everything is predicated on coming out of alcoholism, right? If she hadn't done the courageous things along the way, I never would have been suitable, because I was a frightening person as a young man, and my wife and I barely made it through. I'm glad she's a psych nurse and could make some decisions, but it was all predicated, I guess, on coming out of alcoholism, but based on that Creator would speak to me. God would speak to me. We're going to survive this. We're going to get through. I'm going to be okay. And it led me to marry my wife at 19 years old.
Wow.
And to make decisions that were, I believe, led by God, by Creator.
Yeah.
And then moved on forward in my life, and everything has been kind of built on that. And it's not about a faith believing and all this kind of stuff. It's like, I really do believe Creator tells me and gives me direction, and I wait to hear that. And when I choose to make my own way, there's usually failure involved. And then so when I stop and listen and do follow direction, it becomes clear. And so what's come from all of this is that now I'm a sun dancer, which is very serious activity for me in my life now. And I'm obligated to 4 years of it. I'm in my second year. Just finished second year. But it's involved fasting and singing and dancing and not eating and drinking for days on end. And then living a life that is worthy of that. So I grew my braid out. I spoke about earlier. I got this long braid. Took me this 8 years ago. But
Wow.
I never had hair before like this. I was always trying to make it in the white world, prove
Mm,
myself to everybody I worked with that I was worthy and everything else.
right.
And that was all the wrong direction. So I
Mm-hmm.
started drinking. So braids should be completely free of alcohol, drugs, violence, anger, everything. If you're going to wear and much like a Sikh's turban, that's a
Mm,
person
right.
you're able to run to for protection and they're
Right.
obligated to. That's my
Mm-hmm.
understanding of a turban,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with a braid, I should be seen the same way, not how it's seen or elsewise. And that, or, you shouldn't be wearing a braid if you're drinking and drugging, right? And
Yeah.
living violent lives and all that kind of stuff.
It's like
So,
sacred. It's like
yes,
sacred. Yeah.
yes, it's a living
Yeah.
piece of me. So,
Uh,
and that's all Sweetgrass is about, why we braid our hair. There's a
mm,
ton of teachings and the rest of it. And so now I live this life that is full of ceremony and purpose and reason. I'm also a fireman for the past dozen years and a
oh
fire
wow.
chief. So we built, I was a carpenter for years. That was a failed business, but I worked
Mm,
in the prison system as a native liaison officer, and I was initially a mechanic. So I have these four big career choices, and nursing allowed me for that. So we've worked
mm-hmm.
and navigated. My wife's a very faithful person, in her Christian faith, and she has come along on these journeys with me. So she's
Wow.
been having my back. Now that is again a faith decision that I was supposed to marry her. I never
Mm.
had any intention of marrying anybody at 19 years old. So we
Oh, wow.
married 7 months after I met her. So I feel like creators spoke to me in the right times through all of
Mm-hmm.
the as a child. It, like almost woke up my own faith
Mm-hmm.
that creator told me when I was 7, 8 years old, with my
Mm-hmm.
mother's blood on me,
Yeah.
leaving in the middle of the night to run away from a violent encounter again. That we'd be okay. She's gonna be okay. That and Creator has always spoke to me. Yeah.
That's so amazing.
I don't know
Wow.
if that's what you're after, but that's
That's a
that's
beautiful answer. Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Wow.
There's a lot to it inside to unpack, but we don't have time to pack it
Yeah.
all.
My gosh. Can you top that, Sheri?
Well, just move on. Back to
Yeah.
Allan.
Yeah, back to Allan. Wow. Wow.
So,
I'm
but
oh my
we got all the kids off the payroll now. So Ann and I live in the bush in the big RV. And we have a mill and we have dogs and we have guns and
wow.
and teepees
Beautiful.
and yeah. So we have other plans for the future. One of them is having a wedding barn slash palliative care
Oh.
center slash ceremony space, and
Oh.
yeah.
Horses.
So we want to, and we actually had some children born in teepees that we participated with our two of our grandkids
Wow.
because of COVID. Yeah.
Oh.
So we've got some plans for
Wow.
the future that that are involved ceremony and simple living, right,
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh,
taking care of each other. Yeah. So,
simple.
anyways,
That's what I love. That was
yeah,
beautiful. That was beautiful. You want to add to Sheri to any of that?
sweet.
I can't. What is there?
Yeah, no kidding.
But this is not unique. I don't think any of us are unique. We all have a
Yeah.
faith and belief, and I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My conversations with Creator were quite different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, me too. You don't even want to know what my story was on that, but yeah, I'm glad that I am, part of this community and learning, indigenous. It's like I said, spirituality to me, it's very near and dear to my
My theory
heart.
about this? My theory
Yeah.
about this is that it's not that you guys are any different or not. I just feel like I'm directly linked to an ancestral tribal lifestyle. Like my
Love
great
it.
grandfather was born on the land, in the land
Yeah.
with a midwife,
Oh,
no medical system. Like
yeah.
he came across country as an Iroquois boatman. My great grandfather's
Wow.
dad actually was the Iroquois
Yeah.
boatman, but they were all born
Wow.
outside of a tax system. They were born
Mm.
having to work and fend in the bush, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a term for it, but the thing is, the premise is that they could take care of themselves. The word sauvage, I understand part of that definition. It's a French word meaning
Mm-hmm.
people who can manage themselves in the bush,
Yeah.
who can
Yeah.
fend for themselves,
Yeah.
who are independent of, and that's some
Mm-hmm.
concept we don't have now. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think if anything, I still am closely tied to that tribal
Mm-hmm.
people. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe, maybe other people from other parts of the world aren't as connected to the tribes.
Right.
I don't
Right.
know.
Wow. Wow. That's a conversation we could have for hours, but we got to move on. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Sheri, I'll let you speak on this. Let's talk about truth and reconciliation. What does that mean to you? And add your comments on how we could create a more awareness for this day that's so important.
So I think truth and reconciliation for me really goes back to starting with the truth, starting with the truth,
Yes.
and starting with the ability. So I'm just speaking for me as
Mm-hmm.
you trace my ancestry back, I'm Irish and British.
Mm-hmm.
You go back. I mean, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
like, the British just colonized everybody, including the
Yeah.
Irish. They
Yeah.
started with the Irish and then they
Yeah.
just moved on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not any better than the Spanish or the Dutch or whatever. I'm not getting into that.
Yeah.
But for me, I think a big part of it for me is to be able to humble myself enough to say, yeah, this is the truth. These
Yeah.
are the things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And not feel like I have to defend my ancestors or make excuses
Right.
or do this thing that we want to do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Go, well, at least. Well,
Yeah.
there's none of that. There's no
Mm-hmm.
need for any of that. And so
Mm-hmm.
my hope for myself
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to just look at things honestly, have an honest conversation, teach my children and the people in my circle of influence what the
Mm-hmm.
truth is
Yeah.
without um, without the things that shame brings to us. So my position is that guilt provokes us to change and shame is the thing that keeps us from change.
Oh, that's
So
good.
sometimes I feel guilty about the things that my ancestors did, and
Right.
that's great because
Yeah.
it is the thing that provokes me to be more aware of my behavior and my
Mm-hmm.
position and the language that I use and the approach
Mm-hmm.
that I take to working with Indigenous communities.
Yeah. Oh.
What I want to avoid is I want to avoid allowing myself or anybody in my circle of influence to start to get into the shame trap, because that's the
Right.
thing that prevents us from change.
Mm-hmm.
And so these things happened. That's it. They happened.
Yeah.
And so now what?
Yeah.
Now what do we do? Now we know, and so what? Now what? Here we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are lots of things I think that we can do, but it really has to start with truth. There can be no reconciliation without understanding the truth and the impact of the truth. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
need to dwell on it. It doesn't need to be, like, from my perspective, it doesn't need to be something that I sit around and bemoan and beat myself up about or
Right.
feel shame over or any of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It just needs to be something I'm knowledgeable about,
Uh-huh.
something that I'm aware of, and something that when I forget, that I give people in my circle of influence permission to check me and remind me.
Right.
Give people in my circle permission to say, hey, wait a minute. No. You're slipping. You're forgetting
Uh-huh.
who you are and what your place is. Bring it on back.
Yeah.
And I do. And I think that that's important. I think as a
Yeah.
white woman who grew up with a lot of privilege, and who has the opportunity to be a champion, to be an ally, to be a collaborator, I think that
Yeah.
that is one of the key things for me, is to give people in my circle of influence permission to check me.
Wow. That's a great
Yeah.
answer. Wow. Allan, your thoughts. What does it
Um,
mean to you?
it's encompassing. It's all encompassing. It's
Mm-hmm.
So I had a conversation with a bishop who I was on his council for quite a while as a
Wow.
Indigenous advisor. This is
Mm-hmm.
back in a Catholic era. I don't know, for
Mm.
lack of a better description. Trying to understand where and what we fit in the world, and is
Yeah.
there reconciliation with the Catholic Church? There isn't for me any longer.
Uh-huh.
However, I brought up the articles of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like the findings of the recommendations, and I said that they were an overwhelming effort needs to be put in there to manage that. Oh, but not for us. As a response, the Catholic Church, that's education stuff. A lot of it's to do with other things that aren't directly related to church, like instant, disregard of the effect that residential schools had, and this overwhelming capacity was just blown off and put aside because the only thing we have to do as an Indigenous advisory board to the bishop, this is the bishop saying that to me, was that we need to,
Wow.
come up with a few items that are directly related to the church, and what we need to do is for the church needs to do it. And I'm like, oh, because it's pervasive. Every action has created this, we talk about intergenerational trauma, and people are getting to roll their eyes about it now because but it's like an interconnected trauma for a group of people that still exists. And it's
Yep.
still, and it still has effect on every one of us to a high degree. And it's like, well, why can't you get over it? Well, we can't get over it because we're, universally damaged or wounded or hurt or, in some kind of trauma we got to deal out of and find a way out of. So I did come across somebody who said something really poignant. I don't know where it came from, but that reconciliation is not something that the reconcilies should be driving.
Right.
It's all the people that benefit from this wonderful country that is wanting to bring in, immigrants from all manner of points of the world should be driving. That there's enough resources and money been taken off the land, out of this country that wasn't, empty when colonization occurred, right? There wasn't a war that got fought and we got beat. It was like promises made in treaties broken. There's a lot of stuff that are just like, okay, it's still existing. We're still being like marginalized, and people are benefiting from that marginalization, regardless of whether they think they are or not. So it's like some people really think they got it going on by being pleasant, and being this and that, or they're not that way. But reconciliation needs to be driven by the people that need to do the reconciling, and reconciliation isn't an empty thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not land acknowledgements. Oh my God, if I hear another one, I'm going to smash myself in the head with a hammer. Like, so, I acknowledge that I took your water bottle, but I'm not giving it back. I just want to acknowledge that it's now mine, and thank you, and, acknowledge that it was yours. And this is some teacher's lecture to his students,
That's a good point.
So anyways, not acknowledgement drive it crazy. Reconciliation needs to be driven by people who need to do the reconciling. Because I don't know how to drive it. How do I change when literally now what we're 90 million natives in the country across the continent, 19 million, 100 million of us, I should say.
Yeah.
Indian people across the continent, America and the States, we're down, been reduced to 10 million. So there should be 9 of me. There should be 9 of my brother, my sister, my cousin. There should be 9 of each of us. We've been decimated and reduced to, like, just been reduced, greatly reduced. And while we're being reduced, other people are flooding into this wondrous, rich, resource-filled, new world, right? That's this empty new world. And, there's the doctrine of discovery needs to be rescinded. There's all manner of things that need to be. So truth is, the doctrine of discovery was false, and so we got to look at those hard facts. The reality is there is no ownership of land. Like, none of us can ultimately own it. It's a premise. So that was why when treaties are made, it was just kind of like a nonsensical thing. What do you mean we own the land? There's no ownership of it. Fill your pockets with all the land you can put in your pockets, and take on to the, the afterlife.
You're right.
You can't own anything. And that was the premise of the mindset. Yeah. So a treaty was based on. So we have this treaty being based on people who don't have the same mentalities, are understanding the same thing. They're not seeing the treaty promises in the same light. And this is like UNDRIP and the United Nations. There's a whole raft of things that are just absolutely proving what I'm saying, and are fact, world governments relate, like the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. it's like a thing. It's a real thing, but we don't want
Yeah.
to admit and talk about it in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to actually get into the meat and potatoes of it and the truth of it, because it
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't know. I don't know how to do it. So I don't
Mm.
have it within me to reconciliate.
Right.
I just,
Right.
I don't, I need help. We need help. We need people to be truthful in all manner of ways, be truthful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Wow.
anyway, I don't know if that answers your question at
No,
all.
thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
If
Well,
I could just jump in
yeah.
for just a second, when
Yeah.
you said that, Alan, it makes me think of, we have all this awareness around abusive relationships, and we don't ever expect the subject of the abuse to be the one to advise the abuser on how the reconciliation should happen.
Right.
And so, what, and for me, like as someone who benefited from colonization in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
um, I recognize I don't know what I can do, but you know what? Let's figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there are small things I can do. There are things that I can do that just come from me, that I just do in my practice, whether that is just being honest or just
Mm-hmm.
being empathetic or just being patient or whatever that is, right? But if
Yeah.
everybody just takes the position, I can do something, then something's going to happen. Like
Happen. Yeah.
some things will start to happen. But yeah,
Yeah.
you say that, that's the way that I look at it from my perspective, is that, I
Mm-hmm.
would never, if I offended you, I would never expect you to tell me how to reconcile that.
Yeah.
All you need to do is
And
say
that's
that
the
I
thing.
did.
That's an indigenous mindset to say "kiem," which is, it's a simple word meaning, um, that's like, it's a small thing. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to walk. I can't fix that. It's unfixable.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm going to take my personhood away from somebody who has offended me. So then the
Mm.
offense doesn't go anywhere. I can't carry that. I can't pick up that burden of the
Mhm.
offending person. So we
Yeah.
walk away from it. It's not out of cowardice. It's out of like my own peace for my own family, my own person.
Yeah.
Keeping it intact, especially doing these ceremonies and staying, committed to Sundance for 4 years. I don't have the spiritual, mental well-being to monitor other people's garbage. I have to
Right.
stay focused for my own personal safety, spiritual
Oh,
safety.
yeah.
I have to not get involved in people's
Mm.
garbage.
Right.
And that's a maturity thing too, but at the same time, it's like I just need for people to drive. So we're all greatly benefited as Canadians. If we want to talk about being Canadians, we're greatly benefiting every time we turn around. So Canadians need to drive reconciliation in a truthful
Mm.
capacity. The people that are
Awesome.
benefiting from it need to drive it, because
Yeah.
sometimes we're not benefiting. Like, for instance, tax-free status. I'm tax-free on the res, but half an inch off the reservation, I'm not
Right.
tax-free. Now,
Right.
there's a loophole, other ways you can manage and the rest of it, but you have to be,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm limited to something that's not. We were never to be taxed anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
One of my treaty
Mm-hmm.
promises is to not hang by rope. Well, thank goodness for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can barter. Barter is part of the treaty promises in Treaty 8. So I should be able to make money bartering with tax free, because barter is in there. So there's
Mm-hmm.
all these treaties. Oh, the medicine chest, that's where our free healthcare
Yeah.
comes from. What if the treaty promise? That got broken with, and then cows and plows, twine. Um, the laughable thing right now is that we get $5 a year from the crown, from the queen, as a treaty promise. Every man, woman, and child on the
Mm.
res, but it's been $5 a year since 1989,
Oh.
1899. So it should be substantially more than $5 per year,
Yes.
right? So it never changed. There was no
Mm.
increase in it over all the years. So when we go to court and say no, $5 is now worth, 5,000 a year, 1,500 a year, 2,000 a year, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? In today's money, they're like, people who, well, you just want more money. Well, no. How many people have gotten died because I'm only eligible for an increase on this $5 a year, or a back pay on it for my lifetime? But my mother didn't get hers, my grandfather, my grandparents, the rest of them, they were all shorted on this $5 a year that stayed $5 a year. So literally,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get my $5 a year for 13 years. I got $65. Like, it's laughable. It's actually kind of one
Yeah.
of our in-house jokes about treaty
Mm.
money. $5,
Yeah.
$5, right? So there's all
Wow.
these things that happen. I did get 30 grand back for cows and plows, because the value, and they never really could have ascertained the value, was that they were supposed to be into treaty promises a cow for such and such, and plow and farming
Mhm.
equipment and the rest of it. And then those got put off to other people who were Indian agent managing us, so they never did get to the reses. So just all this matter of nefarious activity
Yeah.
around us that have, done two things. We can't, bank on our money. We can't go to the bank with equity. We don't want to put our communities into municipality status. We don't want to lose our sovereign status nation, because we have 19, Sucker Creek's 19 square miles of sovereign nation. We don't want to start mortgaging against that and potentially lose our land base. So we got to walk a real fine line, and we need champions in the everyday world to drive
Yeah.
reconciliation, because
Yeah.
we continual marginalization, proven marginalization, right? Systemic racism, blah 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 blah. And for me, it's a real thing. For
Yeah.
other people that don't face it every day, it's like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need to kind of quit whining. I feel like they're saying to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I hear
Okay,
you're whining, I want to acknowledge you're whining, but we can't do nothing about your whining.
yeah. Yeah. I
Sorry.
hear you. I guess we'll let Sheri speak and answer the question of, the important question is what matters to you?
Mm-hmm.
What matters to me? Well, I take the position, like I grew up in a village, and that is the approach that I take to my life. I raise my kids in a village. I have several villages. Different villages give my family and my kids different things. And my position is that when we lift each other up, we lift everyone up.
Yeah.
And so that's what matters to me. What matters to me is, what are the small things that I'm doing in my practice,
Yeah.
in my work with First Nations, that is going to lift somebody up. And I'm one of those people that believes that the greatest impact comes with the smallest acts of service.
Yes.
And so that's what I focus on, because I know who I am, and I know what my lane is. And I know that that changes with time and experience and education and all of those
Yeah.
things. Today, right now, what can I do? What can I do
Yeah.
here right now? My undergrad is in child studies, and I'm writing my thesis for a master's in disaster and emergency management. And so that is the approach that I take when I'm thinking about truth and reconciliation. And I'm looking at, so what I look at is the number 66 on the list of items that were founded and agreed upon, and that is youth programs. And so that's kind of the approach that I take, is what can I do in the context of youth programs that are going to make a difference towards reconciliation, and what are the small acts of service that I can do when I have opportunities. And how do I teach my children? My children are the people that are going to make the real difference. And that's the other approach that I take. I don't know that we're going to have a whole lot of success with my generation or my parents' generation or even my siblings' generation.
Yeah.
But I do know that I can have a lot of influence over children and youth.
Yeah.
And so that's where I focus the majority of my energy. Although I recognize I need buy-in from decision makers and people in power and that kind of thing, I really do believe that the biggest change that I can make is focusing on and supporting and encouraging and uplifting children and youth in the environment that I have influence over and that I have a knowledge base in, and in ways that are meaningful to them. Not ways, everything is meaningful to me because I'm an old lady. Now I'm at, there's more of my life behind me than there is ahead of me. So there's, so looking for ways to make things meaningful for the people that I serve.
What matters to you?
I love it. I love Sheri's comments about the children, because again, that resounds in because of the tie-in with the Aboriginal the native concept of our relations, and it just brings in that I'm the link, the voice right now of the ancestors that did all the right things to get me to be alive. And I'm the voice right now to set the stage for our children who are our future. Like, we won't be here in 20, 30 years.
Right.
They're going to be torchbearers of that. Our children are, like, It's what we do. Everything. It's the
Yeah.
bind. It's the purpose. It's our purpose.
Yeah.
Right? So
Wow.
you're right, Sheri. If there's a hope, there's also hope for new people coming to Canada. Somebody said, real smart lawyer said that to me at a conference a while back.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, let's bring all as many new people from all over the world that are coming from all sorts of manner of, and bring them in here because they know, they get it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Wow.
yeah,
Well said, both of you guys. Again,
thank you.
thank you so much for spending some time with me and talking about this very important subject. I really appreciate it beyond words. So thank you. Thank you.
Gosh,
Thank
thank
you.
you for the opportunity. How
Yeah.
Oh,
this is so amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
no, thank
Awesome.
you. Seriously.